Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Taos, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive, reminding you to click on me, subscribe down here, do whatever the cool kids are doing. I also set a dial out on AM 1570 if you're driving around on the highways and byways. Our friends at the Maryland Lottery are going to send me back out on the road on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour soon enough. Places like Pappas, where we had a cup of Super Bowl. That was the last Crab Cake Tour stop we had, was at Pappas, Cockeysville. Actually, it was at Pappas in Parkville the other day. They do karaoke there during the week. It's kind of nice. We are going to be down in Florida a little later on in the month before we get the Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, presented by our friends at Window Nation in conjunction with Jiffy Lube and our newest sponsor, Liberty Pure Solutions, and keeping our water clean. I'm drinking the special purple Kool-Aid right now because we're about to enter free agency. We're about to have this spring training thing. The Orioles can't lose in Florida. Luke and I are headed down to Florida in a couple of weeks to sort of sun ourselves. Maybe I put you on one of those airboats. You and I can go out in the Everglades or something like that. Luke, this is the slowest of slow, but it's the giddiest of giddiest, I guess, on the baseball side with the ownership and seeing Rubenstein down in Sarasota, then up at Camden Yards. I hope he knows how to hold the bat the right way. I'm just saying out loud because the pictures were a little weird. But the baseball team, I don't know that spring training matters. The Lord knows John Harbaugh's preseason record. We could bring that in here, but it feels like a real period of incredible optimism. And even with the football team, with the disappointment of the AFC Championship game, I had David Katz on this week. I've had a lot of great guests this week, talked a little bit of football, but it feels like baseball's kind of moved in a little bit. And I even said to Katz, I'm like, I don't know that I'm like, everybody's all that stung about the football thing if they think about it, because if you like baseball, baseball sort of eliminated a little bit of that, so you didn't have to sit around feeling sorry for yourself the last 4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've talked about this, and it's reiterated this week with the decision to franchise tag Justin Madubuike, which we expected was not a shock when we got sent out the WNST text alert, but it's a $22.1 million cap hit. It just reinforces what we've already been talking about as far as this offseason. It's going to be more attrition on the player side after experience that with the coaches, and buckle up. The next couple of weeks could be a little bumpy on that front. In the meantime, even if all the games aren't being shown on MASN, and we've talked about that, we'll continue to talk about that until it's fixed. That's going to be one of the great tasks that the new ownership is going to have to tackle, is figuring out the future of TV as far as the Orioles and showing their product.
By the way, man, you just gave a pearl of wisdom. I just have to stop you and you say, we're going to talk about it until it's fixed.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever said that out loud. And the
I didn't
last
think it was that profound.
Well, the last 18 years, that's all I've done. Like literally, like, right? People think I hate the team and hate the city and hate the players and hate it, Buck Show. They'll talk about it until it's fixed. You know, it's still not fixed. Clearly, it's not fixed. The games aren't on TV today. You know what I mean? Like, it's not fixed because they're not sold out the day after opening day. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so, well, fixed is nice, and starting spring training 11-2 or whatever is nice too. But like, I can't wait to see what these folks are going to do. And quite frankly,
Sure.
anybody that's listened to the station outside of our voices here this week, it's all we've talked about is what's going to fix it? What's going to make it better? Well, winning and spending money and signing Henderson or signing Rutschman, and but there's more. There's just so much more that could be done. And to your point, we're going to talk about it until it gets fixed. So I love you for that. So profound.
Yeah. And let's be clear. I mean, fixing something, I mean, it's always a moving target, right? I mean, it's just like the roster. It's always, kind of an active canvas. You have certain issues that you try to address, and then something new pops up. As we talked about, they acquire Corbin Burns first day of spring training. They reveal that Kyle Bradish is dealing with a sore elbow. So, I mean, you're always going to have that. But as we talked about when this news broke in late January, beginning of February, for me, the excitement really was lying in the reality of raising the bar. Not that anyone's apologizing for them or should apologize for them, but after a while, you just expect something because the standard has been lowered so much. The idea of raising expectations is really exciting. But to go back to the point I was making, even if we're not watching every day, even if I'm not, I'd be lying to you if I cared that their record is so good through the first 2 weeks of Grapefruit League action. But it beats the alternative, and for the most part, they're getting healthier. And, Gunnar Henderson's back in the lineup, although Cedric Mullins dealing with a little bit of a hamstring issue right now. You're going to have some of that as long as you're avoiding the catastrophic. And, the good news, knock on wood, cross your fingers, cross your toes, whatever, say a little prayer. Kyle Bradish continues through his throwing progression. We'll see. He's getting closer and closer to starting bullpens, and I think that when he gets back on the mound, that's going to be the real tell. Play and catch from 120 feet, all those different things. Those are well and good, but once he starts throwing bullpens, once he starts throwing sim games at some point here in the coming weeks, that's when we really find out. If you recall, last September and October, it was last September. With Felix Bautista, he actually got to the point where he threw a sim game, and then at that point they kind of knew that was a different story. That's a different situation, different degree of injury, based on what we understand. But the point is, so far so good with Bradish, but still a long way to go.
Is there any understanding of when it happened or how it happened for him?
The understanding is he in January started throwing, as most pitchers typically do this time of year. Save for there are some varied routines out there, but he was throwing in January, and I don't know for certain whether he felt it like it was an injury, like he thought, oh, that doesn't feel good, or was it a case of he started throwing bullpens and the elbow was sore, got the MRI. And there was
but the fact that the first minute of camp, they knew something was wrong. It just, I figured it was January because you're not usually throwing in November, December. But I've sort of like, let's say it was a little tight on Halloween, and they've sort of waited and wait. I'm wondering how long they've been waiting, when the trauma happened, if there's such a thing. Like, these are medical questions, quite frankly.
Sure.
They're not baseball questions, but they're more like along that timeline. We know when Bautista happened, we saw it, right? Like, we literally saw it in real time. And then we're like, well, they gave him like 2, 3, 4 weeks. They were trying to figure it out. It feels like that's where they are with him. They're at about a month and a half on Bradish, right?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that, keep in mind, he began his throwing progression the day after pitchers and catchers reported. I guess 2 days after they technically report, their technical report date. The fact that he had already had an MRI, a PRP injection, it's a platelet-rich plasma injection that Dr. James Andrews, probably 10, 15 years ago, that started to become, something that was. I famously, remember Dylan Bundy getting one of those. I mean, it's, the results are mixed on it, and really it comes down to what degree of sprain, partial tear, whatever it is, what degree of injury is there to the UCL? You kind of think about it like a rubber band or a rope. If a rope has just a couple frayed fibers, that rope's still going to work. But if it's, half, 20%, 30%, 40%, then we're talking about a much.
You're making me
story.
think about bungee jumping and what's there. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's right. So.
Right.
But that's how this works. It's not pass fail. It's not as though he severed his UCL. He wouldn't be doing the things he's doing right now if it was a completely ruptured UCL or something like that. So you go the conservative route because Tommy John is not 100%. It's not fail proof. It's not 100% recovery. There is risk anytime you go under the knife for anything. Anytime, just like you have your wisdom teeth out, you're
what?
Twilight,
I want to say this out loud because I Googled this morning because I'm releasing the Peter Principles and I'm releasing the book of my father. And I looked on the front of our website today and I saw the picture of Sid Thrift and I. And I just thought about Sid. So I Googled Sid. I have his book, The World According to Sid Thrift, right? It was written 30 years ago. I got it when he came here because I wanted to understand him. I mean, I knew Sid. Sid was always really nice to me. Sid was Sid respected me, and like, so as much as we can make fun of the Foghorn Leghorn and maybe some of the decision makings and the Barry Bonds, and I discovered Barry Bonds. I do a pretty good Sid, but I Googled Sid to see like when he passed because I knew he passed, and I'm like, it was 2006. He was 77.
It was a while ago.
He was 77. He died after a knee replacement surgery the same day. Like, he went in for a knee replacement surgery. Like, you know what I mean? So you talk about like crazy things that happen. Like, it's like, man, every surgery is a serious surgery, no matter who you are. I'm just saying that out loud.
Right. And look, that's the more extreme situation of something that can happen. And
fans play fantasy land with people's bodies. It's crazy. I've had knee surgery. It sucks.
Right. And that's where I keep telling people and reminding people, yes, through the lens of, if you know Kyle Bradish is ultimately going to have to get Tommy John surgery, yeah. In a perfect world, if you knew that, no one actually knows that right now, or maybe they think it's probably going to happen, but they're certainly not disclosing that with the outside world, in part because maybe you want to try to sign another pitcher at some point here, as some guys are still on the market. But the point is with that, okay, if he ends up having the surgery in May, let's say, rather than March, someone would say, well, then that means he's going to miss more time next year. But if you're Kyle Bradish, if you're his agent, if you're his family, if you're anyone that's invested in his future, including the Orioles, mind you, who still have him under team control for several years, you'll risk a couple months on the back end of the recovery being a little bit longer if the conservative route of rehabbing and PRP avoids him having to have surgery altogether. I've used it and I get it. Aaron Nola and Masahiro Tanaka and guys like that are the exception, not the norm typically when we're talking about UCL injuries, but that's still a way better route to go. I mean, we've talked about John Means, who by no means had an unsuccessful Tommy John surgery, but he's coming up on almost 2 years since he had it, and he's made 4 starts in the major leagues. I mean,
and he may never be right. Like,
right.
You never
I mean,
know, right?
and look, he's on track. He's fine. Like, he's not injured right now, but he had that elbow soreness back in October that took him out of the division series, and the Orioles shut him down for an extended period in the offseason just to say, hey, let's get this right. Even if you're not ready for opening day, we don't need you to throw 200 innings, but we'd like you to throw 140, and we'd like those 140 to be late April through the end of the season, or early May through the end of the season, and for you to be right. So you always have to think about these things. You know, you're always thinking in terms of, yes, what's it mean for the short term? What's it mean for the present? What's it mean for this season? But you're also trying to do well by the player, and certainly the player and his agent and, you know, anyone that he works with, personal trainer, what doctor, whatever. You want to make a decision that's what's best for the player long term, and it's not automatically Tommy John surgery unless it's a UCL injury that is significant enough where you say, yeah, this isn't going to be something you rehab. And that's why, you know, most players end up getting Tommy John surgery. So they're going down this route, and we'll see. I'm guessing in the next few weeks, we'll start to get a better idea of whether he's actually going to get on the mound and make rehab starts in April or something like that in the minor leagues, or he'll start doing bullpens, or he'll throw a sim game, and then they'll say, you know what? He woke up, wasn't feeling great, took another MRI. The UCL is not in great shape. He's got to get Tommy John surgery. And that's kind of how it works. I mean, I'm trying to offer the full picture here. So many people have treated Tommy John surgery because it's just become so prevalent that you almost hear people say, well, get it over with, get it out of the way. It's
not
like
a
a
root
tune-up
canal,
for a
dude,
pitcher.
right?
No, it's not like that. And look, it's so prevalent, so I can understand people feeling that way to a point. But again, it's not 100%. It's not foolproof. It's things can go wrong, and you know there are pitchers who don't come back from it and don't make the full recovery. Now, many more do. I don't want to make it sound like it's this overly risky surgery, but again, if you have a chance to avoid it, and there have been pitchers who have avoided it and have avoided it and pitched for many years. Tanaka pitched, I think his UCL injury was 2014, I want to say it was, and he pitched for another 5-6 years at a very effective level. You know, Aaron Nola had his UCL sprain in late 2016. He just signed another big extension to stay with the Phillies. So he's doing something right over the last 8 years, you know, since that happened. So you have examples, you have situations where if it's on the lesser scale in terms of injury to the ligament, then it makes sense to try to go a more
Well, I have
conservative
no question
approach.
anymore that they have best practices, right? Like,
I hope so, yeah.
for years they didn't. You know what I mean? And you buy into what Elias is thinking and doing and what they're seeing and the way they handled Batista last year, the way they handled John Means 2 years ago as well, that there's precedent for this, and they have best practices in the industry. I don't say ownership would ever listen to that in the old world, but in the coming world, you would hope that that would be the good sense that would take over with this new group that invested $1.8 billion into this investment, that best practices take over. And I think that that's what you're literally talking about, an industry best practice for this injured player, no matter who the injured player is.
Well, and really, I mean, this isn't just the Orioles. This isn't just the Ravens. This is everyone. The next, and I don't even want to say it's the next great frontier because you already see it at work with so much player tracking data. You see it certainly on the pitching side with baseball. With you can look at arm angle, you can look at spin rate. I mean, there's so much data now that can signal, hey, something's a little awry here. This guy's his velocity's down, for example. And it used to be just that. Now you have all this different data. The Ravens players, they wear catapult vests underneath their practice uniforms that tracks how fast they're moving, and they've even been able to track where maybe if a player isn't injured, but he's dealing with, it has more of a nagging, some kind of nagging issue, that he's slowed down or he's just worn down. And they backed off on players. They lighten a player's practice load. I mean, so long story short, the next great frontier as we, Moneyball's 20 plus years old now, speaking in baseball terms, injury prevention. I mean, that's a huge one. You talk about all these different players in any sport. You invest all of this money in the player. You invest so much in terms of counting on that player to be on the field or to be on the court or to be on the ice. You want them available. You want them healthy and available. And you're not going to eliminate injury, but you want to try to minimize it as much as you can. That's why the whole thing with Steve Sanders and the Ravens last year, with the NFLPA report and all the bad vibes and what happened with the COVID outbreak a few years before that, that was bad, because an organization that does so many other things right, that was embarrassing.
Well,
for
that
them.
was all on John. That was John's guy.
I mean, sure. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to whoever is ultimately in charge. The buck stops with them. But the point is, and to bring it back to what we're talking about with Bradish, you're trying to do what's best for the player, but that in turn helps the organization, right? And there's a trust, and we think about all the different years with the Orioles with physicals and failed physicals and different things like, and some of it was legitimate, some of it was understandable, and some of it was, hey, is this on the up and up, or is this you're trying to pay a guy
less money? It was never on the up and up with it. You had to always consider that it wasn't going to be on the up and up with these people. It's what I told the governor last summer. Sure. You know what I mean? Like it's just, that was my experience from the beginning, is they weren't on the up and up. And that's scary if you're a player and they're recommending something and if you don't trust that part of it, I mean, and that's, to your point, Ravens players had a real problem with their organization a year and a half ago and trusting that part of that process. And I would even, not good.
And I would even say this, as it pertains to the Ravens example, you get to a point where, there can be some problems and some protocols or certain elements of it that could be refined, but a big part of that is trust and perception. And when you start to have questions pertaining to that, that's when you have certain guys who maybe worked out at the facility in the spring in the past are suddenly working out somewhere else, and they're not around until mandatory minicamp. It's just, it's part of the culture. It's part of the makeup. And, for the Orioles or the Ravens or any team, you're going to have injuries. I mean, that's unavoidable. You're not going to eliminate injuries, but you want to minimize them. And when you do have injuries, you want to do what's right for the player. You want to do what's right for the organization. You're trying to balance short-term goals and the present with long-term well-being in the future. So, we'll see what happens with Kyle Bradish. I mean, I still certainly am not making any bets that he's going to throw 150 innings this year or 120 innings this year or anything like that. But if you can go this conservative route and the UCL is healthy and he's responding well and he's throwing well, and you get him back in, say, mid-May, Memorial Day, and he's right, and you have him the rest of the year, that I'll surely take that over Tommy John surgery and wondering if he's going to be ready for the start of next year. So I mean, it's just where they are, and it's part of the game. As I quoted you probably a few weeks ago when I saw, it wasn't my data, but I saw in an article estimated, including high school and youth ball and minor leagues, all of that. I think it's roughly a third of pitchers, at least as of a couple years ago, a third of pitchers.
That's an insane number.
Have had Tommy John at some point, maybe even as a 14-year-old, because that's a thing too, even for young pitchers, going under the knife. So it's not, it happens, but that doesn't mean we should be flippant about it and just say automatically, oh, well, go get the surgery because everyone does that. It's not what we're talking about here.
Luke Jones is our dude doing baseball and football and baseball. We started with Madubuike and we went into elbows, and I guess it's just kind of where we are. 'Tis the season, right? Like in a lot of ways, right?
It is. And to go back to Madubuike, I mean, look, the decision itself was a no-brainer. You're not letting a player of that ilk. I looked it up the other day. Over the last 5 years, so 5 NFL seasons, you've had a total of 15 seasons where a defensive tackle, an interior defensive lineman posted double-digit sacks. And the number of guys who've done it more than once, Cam Hayward, Aaron Donald, and Chris Jones, who is about to hit the market. So, it's an exclusive club. So I can understand skeptics saying, I want to see this guy do it again. That's fine. That's a fair position to have. If he does do it again, then pay attention to what Chris Jones gets. If Madubuike plays on the tag, and I'm not saying that it's going to come to that, they might work out a deal. Probably not next week, based on the announcement of the tag coming a few hours before the deadline. That's usually a tell that they weren't particularly close in getting a deal done, but they might get a deal done by the draft or whenever it is. But if he plays on the tag and he has another 13 sack season, whatever Chris Jones gets, you can almost guarantee that Madubuike is going to blow past that because he's also 4 years younger than Chris Jones or 5 years younger than Chris Jones. So, that's part of it. But in the meantime, now with him having a $22 million cap number, this is where you brace. This is where the WNST text alert could be going out in terms of potential cuts.
Certainly, let's see the Bills. Let's talk about the Bills.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you see it, and this is seeing what Buffalo did, and not to say that the number of players that they cut. I mean, what? Yeah, there's some standout players on that list, but guys that have been older, guys that have been injured, guys that weren't producing at the same level. So not exactly stunning, but the sum of the parts, right? I mean, it was quite a few, but the salary cap, you can keep kicking the can down the road and you can restructure and you can use void years and things of that nature. And look, the Ravens did that last year, given the unknown with Lamar, they had to do it. They'll do that when they need to. I'm guessing what you're going to see for them, because they're, after the Madubuike tag, they're about $10 million over the salary cap. They'll restructure Lamar's deal. They can restructure Mark Andrews' deal.
Well, you just mentioned best practices, right? Like in a general sense about Tommy John, the Ravens are the same thing. They know how to do this, and I don't know that the Bills mismanaged it. You know what I mean? I don't know that they woke up and said, "Oh my God, we're in cap jail." I would hope an NFL team that's been that successful recently that they knew all along this was coming. It's a shock to the fans, but like if Ronnie Stanley gets banged this week, I mean, you would be shocked, and you've already wrote at Baltimore Positive that they're going to pit Moses and Stanley to, like there is only so much money, and when this guy's getting 52 and that guy's getting 22 and this guy, like you start counting numbers, and I know Lamar's not a $50 million cap number this year, but they know how to do it. They're best practices people, and even saying that, there's only so much money.
Right. I mean, it's you can keep kicking the can down the road. I mean, the Saints have famously done that for years now. But go look at what their cap, just overthecap.com has every team's salary cap as much as we can see. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close.
And to your point, teams do it differently. They do have a different philosophy on it in some cases.
But every time you kick the can down the road, and yes, you can create space in the interim, but that's just taking away space down the line because you have more and more dead money that piles up. So basically, okay, you look at it right now and you say, oh, it's a $250 million cap, roughly. But if you have dead money that you keep pushing out and pushing out and pushing out, you get to the year 2029, and practically speaking, you might only have a $170 million salary cap because there's so much dead money. That's what we mean by that. But for the Ravens, as it stands right now, about 10 million roughly they need to create just to be cap compliant, let alone talking about signing anyone. So, Lamar's deal, you can redo that. And when we do that, we're talking about restructures here where I'm looking at it right now. So Lamar is scheduled to have a $14.25 million base salary this year. A restructure basically means you take whatever amount from that base salary that you want to. You can take it all the way down that he's making the minimum base salary, take that difference, turn that into a bonus, and then that bonus can be prorated and you can lower his cap number this year. But what does that do? It raises his cap number in future years. So you can do that with Lamar. You can do that with Roquan Smith. Mark Andrews is another good candidate for that. Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley, those are guys at this point you probably don't want to be doing that with because there are value concerns because of injuries or performance. So, they'll do that. They can cut Tyus Bowser, potentially Morgan Moses. We've talked about that. Does Ronnie Stanley take a pay cut? If he does that, maybe it saves Morgan Moses. If Ronnie Stanley doesn't take a pay cut, maybe Morgan Moses is gone. I doubt, and I've seen some people say this, I can't fathom you're going to cut both of your starting offensive tackles. No matter how promising this draft is O-line wise, I just can't fathom you're going to cut both those guys. So
and still think you're a Super Bowl contender.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the thing.
Way.
I mean, these are, again, and we get into this all the time. And look, it's not just Ravens fans or Ravens media. It's every fan base at this point in time, every media member that's kind of spitballing. All these ideas are ideas that sound fine in March and April until you actually get on the field later in the year. And then you say, oh, that's.
Well, this time last year, we talked credibly about playing without Lamar Jackson, right?
Yeah. Well,
and the Atlanta Falcons talked credibly about not needing him, which is
right. Well, and that's the big, that's what's funny. I mean, some teams that'll turn, we've talked about it with Pittsburgh. I mean, you asked me what some of the more compelling storylines not pertaining to the Ravens, stay right here in the AFC North. Is Pittsburgh really going to talk themselves into another year of Kenny Pickett?
Are they going to talk themselves into Russell Wilson or Kirk Cousins is going to win a Super Bowl too? That's another.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Derek Carr. Who are you going to say? I mean, like who? Baker Mayfield's going to win your Super Bowl. Yeah, he might win you some games. It reminds me sort of like Jeff George. Well, he can win some games.
But at the same time, there are only so many elite of the elite quarterbacks. I mean, someone right now who's skeptical of Lamar Jackson's Super Bowl hopes because, well, we haven't seen him play his best football in January. And hey, I'm not going to argue against that. That's true.
I got Joe Flacco's number here if you need it.
Yeah. So, I mean, at what, 39 years old now? So,
I also have Burt Jones's number here, but
sure, exactly. So, but the point, with everything, just to bring it back to what I was talking about, I mean, it's going to be bumpy. Probably the next week or two, there's probably going to be more bad news than good news the next week or two. Now, that doesn't mean the Ravens won't work out re-signing somebody. I mean, I've already talked about, man, is there a way to re-sign Jadeveon Clowney? You're not going to keep Clowney and Van Noy. Is there a way to keep Clowney? I mean, Clowney made, he didn't mince any words about how much he liked it in Baltimore compared to other places he's been. He talked about that at the end of the season. But he's also been a guy that as a free agent has never signed before mid-April. So
he's also made a boatload of money and doesn't need any money, but also this is the end for him.
Yeah.
And, I mean, getting paid once or twice more.
He probably hasn't made quite as much as you might be thinking. I mean, think about it. He was drafted by Houston. They tagged him. He got traded to what? I think it's Seattle was where they traded him. And he's kind of been that guy that's been the 1 year deal, maybe a 2 year deal, 1 year deal. Now, he's done well in those deals. Let me be clear, but he's never
wanted to invest in him.
He's never gotten that $100 million. Right. He's never gotten that $100 million contract. So, but not to get too much on Clowney, but the point is with the Ravens, it's going to be a lot of bye-bye Patrick Queen. Bye-bye, Geno Stone, who, by the way, probably is going to wind up in Seattle.
Yeah.
They cut both their starting safeties, and they have Mike McDonald. You connect.
Well, and Queen might wind up in Seattle too.
Could. Although, both those guys are going to draw interest. I mean, Queen's a Pro Bowl linebacker. Geno Stone led the AFC in interceptions this past year.
But for McDonald to have a leader who knows his system, that would help him a lot.
It certainly would. Yeah. It certainly would. Yeah. So, but
I mean, we saw that when Rex Ryan and Pettin, when they go, they want to take Bart Scott with them. They want to take a play. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I think one other last point I want to make, because this is going to change. Even as someone's listening right now, we could be talking about someone who's already been cut. I mean, that's just 'tis the season. That's what we're talking about. But I have noticed a sea change in how the Ravens have handled these things the last year or two. We used to think about this in terms of the Ravens would cut a guy, maybe give him a chance to get a head start on the market. Generally speaking, they're not doing that quite as much. In fact, I went back and looked. They cut Calais Campbell the day that the tampering window opened, the Monday before, the league year starts on Wednesday. Monday is when the tampering window officially opens, although it's hilarious to think about the idea of legal tampering. I mean, talk about an oxymoron. But they generally, the way they've been approaching this more has been waiting and kind of creating space per needed, on a per needed basis rather than ripping off the band-aid, cutting this guy, cutting this guy, cutting this guy like they used to do it. Now it's much more, I think they're trying to wait it out. As I said, I wouldn't be surprised if they're kind of sort of trying to pit Ronnie Stanley against Morgan Moses as far as, who takes a cut. One takes a cut, maybe the other guy gets cut, whatever. I mean, it's hard to say, but Tyus Bowser to me is about feels like the only no-brainer cut that we're going to see. I'd be shocked if he's back just because he hasn't been on the field the last couple years. And they can save $5.5 million on their cap just by releasing him. But what happens with Ronnie Stanley? What happens with Morgan Moses? I think Patrick Ricard is a really interesting one. I'd be shocked. I don't think the Ravens are going to pay him a $4 million base salary, but that doesn't mean that they don't want him back.
But who else is going to pay him $4 million?
Right. And that's the thing. That's where you say, okay, we're not going to pay you $4, but let's work out a modest extension, and we'll throw some incentives there, and we'll lower your cap number from 5.1 million to 2.5, and we can create $2.5 million in space there. But he might be released. They're evolving as an offense. Although I would say this: if you release Patrick Ricard, who's your blocking tight end? Because the guys that they have are much more of the receiving type. So, these are the things you have to figure out. But we'll see how it goes. And like I said, they have contracts they can restructure to create space, but that always comes with a cost. So, how much of that do you want to do? What players do you want to potentially approach about a pay cut or moving on from entirely? We'll see. As I said, 'tis the season for the WNST text alert to be sent out, and we'll see how that plays out here in the coming days. But my sense is, especially with Madubuike getting the tag, and I'm assuming a long-term deal is not imminent there. Even if they get it done at some point this offseason, probably not happening in the next few days based on, again, they normally wait until the last possible second to announce something. They announced he was getting the tag 3 hours before the deadline. You do the math there in terms of how close they really were. So, it's going to be bumpy. They've got to create some space, and they're going to have to be very judicious with how they spend. It's not to say they can't do it, but that's why I haven't been nearly as lathered up about the idea of going out and giving Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley, real money at the running back position. I think, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll sign Derrick Henry the minute free agency opens, but they've got a lot of areas of need that they're going to have to address, and they're not going to have a ton of cap space to do it unless they're willing to be more drastic with restructures and void years and things of that nature, which, we'll see how it plays out.
Which the Buffalo Bills were. Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out anywhere good tweets are served, and X's and threads and LinkedIn's and Instagrams and all that good stuff. I've had an amazing week here talking about Oriole baseball. John Rand came on talking about the big scoop he had that David Rubenstein. Rick Vaughn was here. John Eisenberg, our old friend. Eric Fisher is happy to not be in courtrooms anymore with Angelo's family and Masson. Matt Dozat came on. He's the guitar player for Seal, for Kelly Osbourne, and a childhood friend of Casey Willett, who once covered the Ravens for us. Great conversation about music and rock and roll and his band and the Bayou and Burt Jones. Alan McCallum came on long form, as did Dave Sheinin, talking about hopes and dreams for Oriole baseball. David Katz came by. So it's been kind of a friends and family week here. Luke, I will warn you that the Indianapolis Colts still consider me a real media member. They sent their .com team after me this week, because the 40th anniversary, as they would say, of the Colts coming to Indianapolis, as we would say the Colts leaving Baltimore here, is coming up a little later on in the month. So I told him, I'm like, we're not going to be doing a big segment here on that because we don't talk about it so much anymore. But He says
40
that
years.
nobody in Indianapolis remembers anything about it, that the Mayflowers don't mean anything there. And this is a kid that is from Chicago. He's a Bears. He grew up, he's not a Colts guy. He's like, I've worked for the Colts for like 7 years. He's like, and when I walk around and I ask people, they know nothing about any of the discord and the distaste that folks here have for all that. So I find that to be fascinating. So it's going to be an interesting March and a long April, as we would say here, as we get into opening day, get into free agency, tampering period. Luke will have all that covered. Anything first happens on the WNST tech service, you know that because you've probably been on it for 15 or 16 years. Thousands still are. And we are putting together a little documentary here for our 25th anniversary. Luke, you're going to like this. It's going to be called No One Listens, Everyone Hears. So we're going to have that out by the end of the month as well. Luke's going to have a suntan and get a proper hot dog and some fried chicken at Yoder's down in Sarasota. I'll compare it to the Royal Farms chicken around here. Of course, there is no comparison to that, but we'll make the best we can in Southwest Florida. I'm going to get to see the Red Sox ballpark, and I'm going to get to wave across the pool at Steve Bisciotti before it's all over with. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. It's March. We're having fun. It's Baltimore positive, and we're going to the World Series and the Super Bowl.